Okay, we're given the following information about stock X in the market. The annual effective risk rate is 5%. So I'll write this down in a mathematical notation, RF. And then we're given the expected return and volatilities for stock X in the market. And lastly, we're given the correlations between the returns of stock X in the market, which is negative 0.25. All right, so we're assuming the capital asset pricing model holds, and we want to calculate the required return for stock X. Yeah, and this is the first part, and second part is to determine if the investor should invest in stock X or not. So, yeah, for the first part, where we have to calculate the required return for stock X, according to the capital asset pricing model, required return for an asset, certain asset equals risk-free interest rate plus beta of an asset times expected return of the market minus risk-free interest rate. And in this case, okay, so you need to know this formula to solve this question. And in this case, the asset is stock X, so I will substitute I's with X. So the required return for stock X, Rx, equals risk-free interest rate plus beta of X times expected return of the market minus risk-free interest rate. So we're given the risk-free interest rate, which is 0.05, and we're not given beta of X, but beta of X could be expressed as correlations times volatility of an asset over volatility of the market. This is one of the key formula you need to know. And yeah, so we're given the correlations and volatilities for both stock X and the market. So by substituting these values into this formula, so we get negative 0.25 times 0.4 over 0.25, because the volatilities for stock X is 40% and the volatilities for the market equals 0.25. So yeah, these two cancels out, so beta of X, we can conclude that beta of X equals negative 0.4. So plus negative 0.4, and we're given the expected return of the market, which is 8% here. So substitute this value in, and we are given the risk-free interest rate, which is 5%. So by calculating this, we get the required return of 3.8%. All right, so what does this mean? Oh, never mind. So before we dive into the second part, so we got the first part. So by this value, we can cross out A, D, and E because only B and C has the right correct required return of 3.8%. And how do we use this value to determine if the investor should invest in stock X or not? So we need to know the definition of expected return and the required return. And required return is the return that an investor requires to make an investment in an asset. So basically, if the expected return of an asset does not exceed the required rate of the return, the investor will not invest. So writing this down, so if expected return is less than required return, no investment. Well, and in other ways, if required return is less than the expected return, the investor shouldn't make the investment because the investor will expect more expected return. So in this case, required return is 3.8%, and expected return of stock X is 5%. So in this case, since the expected return is larger than the required return, the investor should make the investment. So the answer becomes C.